what are the reasons that women should not be pastors? So why? What are the reasons? And I have numerous reasons, but there's really one big reason, and it's the glaring reason. And as you are listening to the Pactum today, I hope you know the reason. You're anticipating the reason. The reason women should not be pastors, though they do amazing things and need to do amazing things for the life and health of the church and the world and families. Women should not be pastors because of the Bible. We have divine revelation. We have revelation from God, the eternal, all-knowing one, the one who knows the end as well as he knows the beginning. And certainly he knows what's best for the church because the church belongs to him. Since we have instruction from him about the church, then we have to take it to heart. And 1 Timothy chapter 2 is the most important passage when it comes to this matter. It's the most maybe direct and clear. And so I'll reference 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12 that says, I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. Well, I like to say to people when I'm preaching sometimes, guess what that means in Greek? Guess what that means in Hebrew? It means exactly what it says. It's a very clear translation of the Greek New Testament. It says what it says. And so that's what we do. That's what we do in the life of the church. This is not instruction for Old Testament Israel in a unique time and place that's not for us, Old Covenant. No, it's not that at all. And so we take that seriously. And complementing this, complementing 1 Timothy chapter 2 would be the qualifications, right? The qualifications for overseers or elders or pastors. We find them in 1 Timothy chapter 3. We find them in Titus chapter 1. And it says in 1 Timothy chapter 3, regarding the one who aspires to the office of overseer, used interchangeably in the Bible for pastor, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife. So it's he, and he is a husband. If we go on in verse 4, he must manage his own household well. In verse 5, it talks about managing his own household well. And if he can't do that, he can't capably care for the church. Chapter 3, also in verse 6, he must not be a recent convert. Otherwise he may become puffed up. Chapter 3, it's all chapter 3, sorry. Verse 7, moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace. So it's he, and it's a man who is committed to his wife, not a wife who's committed to her husband, as much as we are for that, and the Bible is for that. Qualifications for pastors are, they do have to be not only men, not all men are qualified to be pastors, but we do see that the person must be a man. The same thing is true in Titus chapter 1, very similar. It's the same thing. Some of it's stressed a little bit differently. So why not have women pastors? Well, the reason is, first and foremost, above all others, is because the Bible. Now, there's also a complementary reason to this. And so let's call it a second reason why women should not be pastors. They can't legitimately be pastors, and that is because of the testimony of the church. And by church, I mean, we're not the first Christians. So throughout the church's history, if we pay attention to that, it's not authoritative. Scripture and Scripture alone is the inerrant God-breathed revelation. But we do pay attention. We try to read the Bible with the church so that we're not coming up with unique or novel interpretations. They have the Spirit. We have the Spirit. So let's pay attention. And so we at least want to ask, so what is it that people before us have concluded, and why have they concluded it? Before we just say, well, we're just going to chuck all history and say, we don't care. We're going to figure it out ourselves. No, we stop and we say, what did they do? And why did they do it? And were there debates about it then? And how were those debates settled? So, and part of this is really, we're talking about being conservative. And I don't want to be conservative in all things or to be conservative to be conservative. But it's important that before we destroy things, we say, why is it there? That's conserving. So before we just say, I'm going to go tear that fence down because I don't like the way it looks, we have to say, why is it there? And this is how it is for anything that's been done in the past. We don't want to be arrogant and say, well, that's how they did it before us. And that's not what makes us comfortable. It's not what we would prefer. It doesn't seem to make sense. And so without paying attention to why they've done certain things, we just, take the wrecking ball and destroy everything. And so we want to conserve things that should be conserved. Some things aren't worth conserving. This seems to be one of them, especially since it's so clearly stated in Scripture. And so let's not be foolish about the past or ignore the past. What has been done? Why has it been done? Let's not pretend like up until yesterday, everything was a bad idea. One scholar who has looked into these things in a far deeper way than I have has this to say. Apart from a few sectarian movements, the entire Christian church from the first century until the 1850s agreed that only men could be pastors and elders. That's worth noting. And the vast majority agreed that only men could do public Bible teaching of both men and women. So there's that. And he goes on to say from the 1850s, where things are starting to change and now we're having seismic shifts and perspectives on things. And I don't just mean life within the church with theological liberalism and post-enlightenment kind of thinking. The Bible maybe is not God's divine revelation, perfect, authoritative, sufficient, things like that. It says from the 1850s until the 1950s in the United States, women pastors were a tiny minority, but over 98% of evangelical churches had only men as pastors. So even after that significant change in the 1850s, until about the 1950s, it was practically unheard of. So why the change? Because we found new manuscripts? No, that's not the case. It has more to do with our culture around us. So let's pay attention to the history of things.